You're listening to the Yard of Greatness podcast, episode number 32. Welcome to the Yard of Greatness podcast. My name is June Allen, your sister in service from juneallen.net. On this show, I empower non-white listeners to prioritize their racial wellness and emotional sobriety. The platform is for educational purposes, is based on my experiences, and is shared in good faith. Always consult your doctor, therapist, or licensed mental health professional before applying any of the suggestions given within this platform. The vision is to build a blackalicious life of empowerment so there can be peace. Now on with the show. Greetings, family, greetings. Welcome to the Art of Greatness. June Allen here, and great to see you on another episode. Now, if you've been listening to the last few episodes, you know that I've been going through a series about the 7 keys to Black empowerment. Thank you so much for those who have got in touch with me about the previous series. It's good. It's good to know that you all are getting something out of this, and it's always good to hear from people giving me feedback and stuff. And I'm glad that you're all enjoying it. So in the last session, we talked about the key number 4, which is about understanding the wound. And today we're going to be talking about key number 5. The 5th key to Black empowerment is about setting boundaries. So what exactly is a boundary? A boundary is basically what works for you. What are you willing to put up with and not put up with? Where do you draw your line in the sand? That is that is a boundary. So what I've identified is that there are 3 different layers of boundaries that are important for us as Black people to be aware of. The first layer is social boundaries. Now, when we talk about racism, white supremacy as a system, this is where it's important for us to set boundaries around, people that practice white supremacy. And this is in order for us to protect our well-being. So it's about being conscious of, what happened, how do we behave when we're around white people? How do we behave when we're in potential vulnerable situations that where white supremacy can play itself out? I mean, obviously we know that there is no way you can go on the planet where white supremacy isn't active. But yeah, it's about being really conscious when we're out in the world of, how we behave, how we respond to racism, and just being really, really aware of people that practice it. And how do we, what's our behaviour like when we're around white people? Yeah, there may be several ways that you want to set boundaries around, white people in order to keep yourself safe. It might be certain conversations that you don't have. I mean, I choose now not to have any sort of deep conversations with white people about race, because inevitably it always ends up in, them kind of getting all in their white fragility feelings, and me sort of trying to justify and explain, and I'm not going to put myself through that anymore. So this is a social boundary that I have around white people, that I just don't I try not to engage in those conversations anymore, because it's emotionally unsafe. The next layer around boundaries is your external boundaries, and when I talk about external boundaries, I'm talking about when you're around your family and or when you're in community spaces. And this can be, literally, physically, like how close you are to people, whether people can touch you or not, and also how people speak to you, within the community and stuff like that. We know that there's internalized racism within our families, within the community. So again, this is something that is important for us to be clear on within ourselves, what conversations are okay for us and which ones are not okay for us, and to not have a conversation, not have those conversations if that's where our boundary is, not to talk to people about certain things. A classic example of this is I choose not to talk to parents that insist on hitting their children. This is something that's been in our community that I believe is again, it's a scar from slavery. We do to our children what white supremacy did to us, and this is an issue that's been passed down intergenerationally from slavery and just from being, a victim of white supremacy. So, my boundary around that, obviously it's inside the community. And I don't, I'm not going to get into conversations with other black people about it because it's painful. It's triggering for me, because it triggers, the stuff that I experienced when I was a child. And also, I'm not going to try and convince somebody, not to do this thing to their child if they're that committed to it. So I choose, I'll pray for them, I'll keep them in my thoughts, all that kind of stuff. But for me to kind of consciously engage with this person and try to convince them, I might say something initially, but if I really get pushback from that person, then I'll back off, because I'm not going to put myself and my inner child at risk of becoming really, overly triggered by them making excuses. There was a recent situation on social media where this woman was just basically saying that sometimes children only understand pain, and it was so painful to hear her talking about that. But I couldn't help myself. I just said to her, if your partner or husband hit you for the same reason that you're saying, if your husband said to you that you only listen to him through pain and after he hit you, would you accept that? Would you accept that behavior? And she came back with some really rude comment, and I just thought, okay, she's saying that because what she's heard is that I'm making her wrong, and I kind of was making her wrong. But, she wasn't willing to be open to, trying something different with her children. She just thought, well, I'm going to hit my child. It's my child. Do what I like. I'm going to parent how I like, and that's it. So I chose not to continue engaging in the conversation because it's just a waste of my energy. But I always find it really fascinating and really, really painful, actually, that these, I hear the same people that talk about, how domestic violence is disgraceful and all that, they don't want domestic violence to happen, but yet it's okay to beat the children. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's all pain. Whether you want to, tot it up as something else or not is another issue, but it's all the same thing. It's abuse, it's pain. And we have to start owning that so that we can start to change the game. There are other ways to raise your children and to discipline your children rather than to inflict pain on them. Black people have enough trouble as it is in the world trying to survive, rather than having this internalized stuff put on us as well. And we just need to find other ways of doing it. It's just not working. So having these external boundaries within our within our families and within the community is really important. Really important for our own sense of self and for maintaining our well-being. So then there's the third layer, which is the internal boundary, and this is all about how we treat ourselves, what's okay for us, the way we treat ourselves. And quite often you'll find that if we've been abused by other people, that we'll quite often do the same thing to ourselves, just like how what white supremacy's the violence and stuff that our ancestors experienced, that's now become intergenerational, and we do that to each other. The parents do that to the children, and so what we do now is we internalize what our parents do to us, and then we do it to ourselves. So our own existence becomes self-abuse. And this is kind of what another kind of layer of what happens in addiction, actually, is that we end up destroying ourselves because we just repeating the same behavior that our parents did to us. So having strong internal boundaries means that what we say we're going to do to ourselves, treat ourselves, take care of ourselves, is being clear about what is okay and what's not acceptable, and to keep doing the internal work until we achieve and keep those boundaries firm and keep those boundaries so that we can stay safe. And a lot of the time, the reasons why abusers are, get away with what they do is because boundaries are weak. Our internal boundaries are weak. Our external boundaries are weak. Our social boundaries are weak. So therefore, when we're not able to be clear and say what is okay and what's not okay for us and mean it, other people are going to, they'll understand that, and they'll just keep abusing. They'll just keep abusing us. So we have to really be honest about where our boundaries are weak, and practice making it clear with other people what does and does not work for us, and not from a sort of perspective as begging other people for permission to say no. It's not that. It's you just saying no, that doesn't work for me, and then being clear in your head about what the consequences are if that person carries on. What are going to be the consequences for that person if they carry on being abusive? Only you know what's appropriate for you, and you have to stick to that. You must be clear about the next step that you're going to take if this person does not respect what your boundary is. And a lot of times a lot of us end up abandoning ourselves because of a fear of being abandoned by other people. So what happens is, you're in this abusive relationship and you just keep abandoning yourself. And then what happens is you become so dependent on the other person. You become whatever the other person wants you to be, that then you just stay in the relationship and keep being abused, because then you become afraid of that person abandoning you, even if the relationship is abusive. So this then becomes a vicious cycle of fear of abandonment. Standing up in who you are and standing in your own sense of self, then it becomes almost dangerous to be yourself, because what happens is when you become yourself and you start showing up for yourself and standing up for yourself and saying no, it triggers the abuser. The abuser is going to start getting angry, and it tries to force you back into that childlike place where you just submit to whatever's going on going on with them. So the healing process requires us to keep defining and resetting boundaries as appropriate. And in the beginning of the healing process, this can be quite difficult, because obviously you're not used to it. You're used to just letting that person get away with what they're getting away with. But it's important for you to just keep being clear, and keep being clear on what the consequences are if that person continues to violate your boundaries. Setting good boundaries is all about practice. It's not just something that, I just say to you in this podcast and then you just go out and do it. You can sort of go out and do it, but actually being able to master the art of setting really good boundaries, it takes practice, because quite often there's a lot of kickback from the person. That person might get abusive. They might get, the abuse might get worse because you're actually saying no. So it does take guts to set boundaries, but when you do set them, you'll find that you're able to, stand in your integrity, and you'll also be able to grow up more emotionally, because you're not constantly being triggered by the other person and kind of forced down into this childlike place to submit to their demands. You're actually standing up and being a grown up and saying, actually, no, this doesn't work for me, and I'm not going to allow you to treat me that way. If you're a mother in particular, this process of understanding boundaries and being able to set them and follow through and all of that, this is such a key part of parenting, because children are just, they're destined to cross boundaries and try your patience and all of that kind of stuff. And so when you're clear in your own mind, in your own surroundings, what is okay and what's not okay for you, what the boundaries are, then you just find it so much easier to function. Even though it is hard to say no to your children, it's very hard to not give in to their demands, especially when my daughter, she can give me a very cute face when she wants something, even when she knows it's in the wrong and she's trying to cross my boundary. But your boundaries are there to keep you safe. Your boundaries are there to help you heal, and it's for you to kind of keep deciding, keep reviewing, keep sharing, what your boundaries are, and what what works for you, and how you're going to maintain it. Because that's the only way really that you're going to heal, is by setting these boundaries and then keeping them. So as a wounded daughter, as somebody who is involved or has been involved in an abusive relationship with their mum, this can be one of the most painful but also one of the most liberating parts of the healing process. And this is because when you begin to really take care of yourself and set the appropriate boundaries with your mum, with that person, with whoever's been abusive, then that's when you really start to grow up, when you really start to mature and really show up for yourself and make your mark in the world. When we don't have really strong boundaries, our default position is always going to be to shrink into that, that frightened, that powerless inner child. But once you begin to learn what boundaries are and begin to start practicing them and setting them and being clear on what they are, then that's really when you really start to come into your own. This is what true empowerment is about at every level. So this is week 5. Week 5 is what we is the webinar week within the mastermind, when we really get to grips and start talking about the power of how to set boundaries. So if you're in a difficult relationship with your mum and you're finding it very, very difficult to set the appropriate boundaries around her behaviour, then this week, week 5 within the mastermind, is really going to give you the support to be able to keep practicing the boundaries and really understand where your boundaries are being violated. You can find out more at daughters.juneallen.net. That's daughters.juneallen.net. That's it for today's show. I hope that you found the whole concept of boundaries really important and something that's really going to trigger something in you to be able to really start to think about where your boundaries are being crossed and how you need to set them. If you need the support around it, you can join the mastermind, daughters.juneallen.net. If you'd like to speak to me personally, share in a private environment about this stuff, you can schedule a call with me at callme.juneallen.net. Take care, family. I shall see you next time. This podcast is sponsored by the Yard of Greatness Empowerment Program, Build Your Blacknificence. A compassionate 6-week mastermind honouring the wounded daughters of abusive black mothers. We're constantly told that we should honour our mothers, but what do you do when she repeatedly behaves dishonourably? Many wounded daughters cope with maternal abuse by venting to others, blaming yourself, and believing that things will change if you just try harder. Deep down, you know that these things don't work, and now you're trapped inside the resentment of being unheard. What has been the cost of that relationship? What has been the cost of you not addressing your pain? How does it impact your ability to love, to thrive? If you're exhausted by the self-doubt and anxiety around your mother's behaviour, I have an opportunity that will transform the way that you feel about yourself and the relationship. If you're scared of hurting your children the way your mother hurt you, then this space will empower you to review and recharge the way that you parent. After the success of the webinar, I'm Scared of Becoming My Mother, wounded daughters of abusive black mothers will have an intimate, non-judgmental space to understand the wound, connect with others, and heal through self-empowerment and self-parenting. If you're a wounded daughter looking for a compassionate space to heal, go to daughters.juneallen.net. The mastermind will launch on March the 10th, 2018. I hope to see you there.